little present here.
Whoa. Okay.
Thank you. So we're ready for the last session of the Micro Focus Customer Forum 2018. Is the future of testing. We are going to have 3 speakers, not 2, as I told you during the introduction. It's going to be Shane Evans, functional director, functional testing director, Jason Bainfield, performance testing director, and Renato Quedas, which is strategy director for the performance and functional testing area. So, Jason, are you? Who is Renato? You going to start? Okay.
I start.
Perfect.
Oh yeah, I do start.
I'll jump up when you're ready.
Ready?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. Okay. So let's get the show going. Right. So what we wanted to do with the session is just bring up some strong market trends or things that we believe are going to impact testing moving forward and how we have to think differently. And the guys really I'm basically the hostess because I don't have too much to say. Who owns and drives the products are Shane and Jason. So they're the ones thinking all day long. So my job is very easy. All I got to do is sit and look smart with these guys, which is pretty easy. So, all right, so let's get it going. How many of you have not heard the term AI this year? At all. Right? Okay. So then you know why we're going this way. But see, AI and ML AI itself, it's a big thing, right? If you look at AI properly, there are many things involved in an AI. But the one that's catching up people's eyes and keeping us thinking mostly is ML, right? And the purpose of ML is very straightforward. It's the idea of collecting data and making sense out of it in a consistent manner through pattern analysis and algorithms. That's what it does. So the challenge then is there's 2 ways of looking at it. There is how do we leverage that kind of technology to help our customers to do better testing? How do we test it itself? I mean, so one of the things that analysts are very hot now is how do you test AI, right? How do you know if your machine learning algorithm is doing what it's supposed to do? Right? So there are many aspects of it. And what we're going to do is I'm going to let Shane and Jason come up and then start talking to you about what do we see, right? What is it so important for us to consider the usage of that on testing itself? If you think about, if the principle is amounts of data, we just saw Julian talking about how much data he collects through Performance Center. So imagine how much we collect in SRF. You're running your tests in SRF, right? We can see which platform you're using, how long is it taking, SRL, performance stats, right? Or even in the on-premise products. So the idea is, how do we use all that data? What can we do? What is the possibility? So I'll let you guys drive now. You up, guys. It's yours.
Sure. So, so for me at least, one of the big challenges is, as Renato mentioned, how do we test AI-enabled systems? And you might say, well, I don't have AI-enabled systems in my environment today. Maybe some of you do. But it's actually more pervasive than you might think. So for example, Amazon shopping cart. Everyone's familiar with their Amazon shopping cart, right? I'm using Amazon almost daily. I have everything shipped to my house. I don't go shopping anymore. I don't like the experience, so I just do it online. That experience of logging in and seeing what's available to me, what's tailored to my preferences, my shopping habits, my browsing habits, actually extends far beyond Amazon itself. And it doesn't matter if you have the Echo dots all over your house, listening to your every word, and then popping up items in your shopping cart that are interested in, and I could tell great stories on why I think that's true. But it is actually using machine learning to determine what your interests are, what your behaviors are, and what could be sold to you as a consumer. So this makes a very interesting challenge for functional testing. Like when I log on to my Amazon versus when my wife logs on to Amazon, you see very different everything. It's not just a different set of items, it's a different layout. It's an entirely different user experience because they're tailoring it to me based on all of that behavior. So how do you test something like this? How do you test not just the different shopping cart from one person to the next, but the influences in that environment, which for Amazon at least, as an example, extend well beyond, as I mentioned, Amazon itself. For example, when you're on Facebook and you see the Amazon shopping, like an ad on Facebook for something that you browsed on Amazon, the reverse is true. So you like something in Facebook, suddenly it pops up in your Amazon feed. And this is just one example of many. They have many sources of your information, cookies that follow you from place to place, from site to site. So how do you test that? We have to think about different ways of testing these types of systems. But one example I like to give is actually in the performance domain. In something that we started doing back in Performance Center 12, which is to understand what our users are doing and applying some logic to understand. Maybe you can explain it better.
Yeah, absolutely. So understanding the behavior of different users and different websites, using different applications, and being able to generate test scripts and test scenarios based, it's probably a good idea. The feedback was bound to happen at some point in time with two microphones clashing.
Yeah.
But just using that data to be able to automatically generate test scripts and test scenarios to be able to improve the efficiency of our testing efforts and making sure that it's on target with user behavior.
How many of you are using Performance Center today, by the way? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, fair amount. Are you familiar with what Jason's talking about, the performance application lifecycle?
Has anyone played around with PAL?
Yes. 1, 2. So fewer. So you have it. You might not be using it today. This is actually born out of our Real User Monitor product several years ago. And the original iteration was just to scan your production data and then output, here's steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Here's your top 10 URLs, and this is your user script. But what happened prior to the version 12 release, when we revised PAL, 12.50, actually I think it started before, that was the version 2. So version 1 is we now compared the data between test and production and said, okay, what are we doing in test? What are we doing in production? And overlaying the two to get a better sense of how to test. But that's of limited value, right? So we have the data, we can analyze it, we can structure it in a way that's meaningful for performance testing, but how do we make actual use of it? So in the next iteration, which was the 12.50, we can now analyze that production data and output a scenario that is representative of production. How many users do you need to generate this load? What's the relative pacing between the virtual users in order to generate these transaction volumes? And it will actually output VUGen scripts that represent the flows. And you can select 80%, 50%. What do we want to represent of our production users? And this is a very powerful tool that I wish more hands would go up every time I mention it, because it's something that we feel is kind of, it's there to help evolve you to the next level of performance testing. So we want to do the same sort of thing in functional testing as well. A little slightly different challenge. But again, if we have the structured data or unstructured data, if we can pull from various sources and understand what our users are doing, using some patented machine learning algorithms that we've created for this purpose, we can give you functioning test scripts from that data. So that's just one example.
Yeah, and I think also, part of the reason why we don't see a lot of hands going up is because it's based on RUM, right? So it's requiring some of our tools for it to be able to work.
In some cases, yes.
But we're going to be expanding it to App Dynamics and the new relics and pulling in data from other third-party tools to be able to have this.
And how, production data like Google Analytics, Web Trends, Real User Monitor, various sources that are available today, but it's something that for all of you who put your hands up for Performance Center, I strongly suggest taking a look at. Give you a sense of where this could go. And here's some of the things that we're kind of thinking about in terms of, how do we apply machine learning to what you're doing today in testing, in both aspects, to test systems that are themselves AI enabled and have a better understanding of what your users are actually doing, because business analysts don't know and tend to copy and paste from the previous business analyst. And how to leverage machine learning to better the quality of your testing. So did you want to go through?
Yeah, sure. So we talked about PAL already and trending. Obviously with everyone moving to more of a DevOps and agile cadence, being able to trend against baselines and against previous builds becomes more and more important. So we've doubled down on that in PC with our trending analysis. Within vInsights, being able to analyze the way that your client and your backend communicate with each other and recommend certain behavior changes over time. And then anomaly detection. So we developed this in Storm. We've moved it down to Performance Center. But with anomaly detection, we actually look at the data that's coming in. And as a test runs over time, we start to understand what the expected response time, for example, is supposed to be. We identify an upper and lower threshold, and then once you peak above that upper threshold, for example, we flag it as an anomaly for you so that you can get a better identification.
Yeah, and very powerful, the anomaly detection, which was 1256, 1255?
1255.
55.
Yeah.
But it's, like Jason said, from Storm Under Load as originated, and like we talked about earlier, right? We put something out there, we get fast feedback, we improve it, and then does it make sense to bring it to the on-premise products? The anomaly detection, capturing all, imagine the scenarios we were talking about earlier, capturing all this data from various sources, your site scope monitors, your different application components, firewall, network, etc. And then when that anomaly occurs, that spike, say, okay, what's the most likely cause of that? Based on everything else. Did I run out of database connection pool threads, for example? Did something hit 0 at that point? And anomaly detection will help you pinpoint that. So previous speaker mentioned, creating test results is a pain. Sometimes it takes hours, sometimes it takes days. Anomaly detection is meant to help you pinpoint, like as something happens, this is where I need to start.
I think it's a common problem, right? I think that even in like the PM world, we're dealing with it today, where there's almost too much information out there to be able to manage. And so we feel like part of our responsibility is to take all this data in for you guys, help to analysis, and provide you the results that you need. It's interesting. We had a session with some of our customers on Monday, and part of the advice that we were provided, which we'll move forward with, was to kind of expose those algorithms a little bit so that it's not kind of magic behind a black curtain. You understand the analysis that's going on and how we're getting to those answers. And I think we'll be taking that into account.
That reminds me of a paper that was produced for the predictive analytics and the Octane side, which is now becoming a core feature of the product itself. 12-page scientific research study that was presented, peer-reviewed, and it wasn't just, hey, we've got a cool product and trust us, it works. No, it was a peer-reviewed study, and it resulted in some pretty cool stuff. One up here that I wanted to kind of highlight, though, is the trending. In Storm Under Load, we have a really cool opportunity in that we're providing services to not one, but many customers, right? So you have your own Performance Center environment, you have your own load runner, and you can do trending across your own organization, different releases. But when we do it, in Storm Under Load, we can tell you not just what happened from one test to the next, or what happened from one release to the next. We can tell you what happens in your industry. Is what you're seeing normal for this type of application, in testing at this load? So we can look at it across. We have a ton of data, and ton is a pretty vague word, but I mean petabytes of data from performance tests to be able to say, is this normal for an Apache-based web application that's running on that we're monitoring? And maybe you should look at this. Maybe how do we trend against other companies in your sector, for example?
Yeah, give you some app comparisons to go after.
Yeah.
Right. One of the other things on here, the cost projection item that we're looking to do. I think as more organizations actually move to the cloud, performance testing becomes more of a function of cost, right? You've got microservices. You're just going to scale on the back end to be able to handle large performance loads. So it's doing algorithms not just to tell you, whether you meet a certain threshold, but how much it's actually going to cost you on the back end to be able to meet that threshold, so that you can do some fiscal analysis of whether it's worth fixing a performance issue.
Well, hold on. If I'm running against one service and it costs X, don't I just multiply it by 10 services and it's not linear?
No.
Okay. Because that's how I joke, because I think that's how some people would approach this problem.
Yeah.
When it's absolutely not. What about the chaos testing piece?
Yeah, so something we've been kind of messing around with on the side for resiliency testing, kind of using chaos monkeys to be able to go out and randomly take servers and services up and down on the back end and see what the impacts are, and being able to manage just a cluster of monkeys that are coming back, tying that in with our performance results, and showing the customers what the impact is.
Is anyone familiar with chaos testing? Yeah? Anyone doing it today? Anyone just run around unplugging servers as the test is running?
Yeah.
There's 3. I'm going to turn off this one. See what happens? We used to script these events internally, but the challenge, I think, is getting access, right? So is something I foresee is convincing the organization to give me the access to go and say, cut this off. But what you can do is simulate from the front end. You can simulate and say, okay, I'm hitting 3 servers now. I'm going to stop hitting 1 and just drive to the other 2, but focus all the load over there. So you don't necessarily have to turn things off to make it seem like you did.
I think there's other kind of neat things that we can do, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think since we own things like AppPulse,
Yeah.
that have agents that get installed on the back end, we might be able to leverage those as part of our chaos testing to give us the access to be able to push
Sure.
things.
Did we want to kind of wrap on this one, or
Yeah.
how are we doing for time?
Yeah, let's move.
What's next?
So NLP I think is a little more interesting, right? If you look at it around, a lot of people tied NLP and AI because it is one aspect of AI, but the way we're looking at it is more about the codeless agenda. How many of you have heard about scriptless, codeless functional automation?
It's the way of the future. You will never have to write a line of code again, right?
Never write it? Yeah, there you go. So can you just jump to the next slide? Oh, there you go. So for those of you, why is it so important? Why is NLP so important in this whole grand scheme of things? Because it uses a skill that you all learned since you were 3 years of age. You basically communicate. You use your language to communicate.
Some of us were talking a little earlier.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, see that, remember I told you I'm surrounded by smart people? There you go. So I was a little slow, maybe 4. So the idea, the concept is we keep pushing people, and you can see that in your hand today, right? How many of you are used to have mobile assistants? Like, I call mobile assistants because Apple was smart. They like putting names on things. They say Siri, right? And Amazon has Alexa, right? And when Shane says, I have multiple dots, how many dots do you have?
Only 2.
Oh, 2, okay.
I know someone that has 9, though.
So I bought one for my daughter's room, and I freak out with it because I swear that thing is listening to me 100% of my time. It is absolutely listening to you, right? And it is collecting data.
Yeah.
The scariest one, did you see Amazon has a new one that is the camera one?
Oh, yeah.
They haven't launched yet?
Tells you if you're good looking or not.
Exactly.
It's not very nice to me.
I'm not buying that one. So it's going to be like, So the idea is more and more what's going to happen is you're going to see systems using your voice, or they're not using your voice really, they're using structured language to represent intent, sentiment, things like that. So from the tester perspective, that's kind of interesting because you're going to be dealing with all of that, and the impact of that in where we're going, it's where it gets really, really interesting. So I'll let you boys take it.
Yeah, so again, I personally see a couple sides to this. I don't know if you have any specific areas in the performance area side that...
No, we'll get there when we get
So,
over to the west.
As Renato mentioned, like, again, there's two aspects. So NLP is a function of AI to understand our voice, our text in plain, in my terms, English, but maybe German or French or whatever, and recognize what you intended from that. So there's a couple of things there. We are now starting to test, for example, in the mobile device management side, because applications now and the operating systems that are on these devices can take your voice and understand commands like Siri, right, and give some result back. And the applications that we're building are leveraging that. So we need to be able to support it. So that's one aspect. But the other, from my perspective, and maybe a little more interesting, is, and I'm just going to let this run in the background and I'll explain it as it does. It's just going to loop a little bit. Is what if we could leverage NLP or natural language processing from the other direction and say, instead of writing code to do automation, what if you just told me what to do in whatever language that you're naturally communicating in, and I interpret that in a certain way to do automation. And what you're looking at here is exactly that. So we write our test cases not in C# or Java, right? We write it in my case, English. And then somebody else interprets that or goes and does some automation as a result. But what if we could cut out the middleman and just map the language to the APIs and say, as I'm typing here, click on the button, navigate to, as a customer, for example, in the Gherkin format, what do we say?
Given when then.
Given when then. So given I'm at the login page for da-da-da website, and I enter my username and password into the fields, I should get some result. That's a test case. But it's also something that we, as tool vendors, that understand automation and have a full breadth of APIs and tools beneath the surface to enable that, can interpret that language into something that's executable. So this is not a mock-up. This is a functioning piece of code. But of course, everything that we do needs to be enterprise, right? That's the goal. We don't put out what's a politically correct term? Half-assed code is, I think, the right term. So in order for this to work, it needs to work at scale. It needs to work across multiple languages, multiple operating systems. It needs to be able to do different technologies. So while this is a working piece of technology, and this is just an example where we're actually typing in plain English and some recognition of objects is happening, but then on the flip side of that, now I want to run it. And I can interpret that plain English and perform the automation against it. This isn't a layer on top of like a LeanFT or Selenium, but it is actually like a plain language interpretation that's mapped to an automation. There's a lot more that we're looking at in terms of this. So from a functional testing perspective, how do we make it easier to do business process testing? Using that same approach where we want to enable the less technical teams to do some level of automation, maybe using what I just showed, maybe using a more natural way of communicating in some way, but providing the tools and the framework to be able to do that. Or testing from a model-based approach, which we do provide models for the application, but I mean models from a testing perspective, the overall test model or the requirements model for an application, and how do we turn that into test automation. Is there some?
I think, True Client and HAR were up there from a codeless perspective, right?
Yeah.
Of being able to generate those. I think for us on the performance side, we've tooled around and created a little chat bot for Storm, which obviously, you can just say, go run my test, and we kick off a load test.
Yeah.
But, that's kind of our first stage toward that.
It is the first stage because like the previous example, run test number 235 is easy, but what about, run a test of 200 users against X website that,
Exactly.
And just write it out in
Just
this
write
format.
my scenario out in plain English.
Which goes and executes.
Or whatever.
Exactly. What about some of this stuff over here that we're looking at. So testing from requirements, mock-ups that I mentioned, testing from code changes. We actually, for those of you maybe familiar with Octane, or maybe in ALM, the ALI piece, Application Lifecycle Intelligence, where we can see the changes that are happening in the code. And as those changes are introduced, mapped to requirements, mapped to test cases, and have a kind of relationship between them, so we understand the risk, we understand what we need to test. But there's a lot more that we can do there now that Octane is directly exposed to the CI and directly exposed to those changes as they're entered into the build pipeline. From a functional, from a performance testing perspective. And I know actually some very advanced customers, Paychex in the US, who'd been doing this for some time, but they developed it on their own entirely. So it wasn't something that we had done, but they used our tools to enable it by scanning through code changes and understanding from those changes what areas of the application needed to be tested. And that would dynamically create the scenario, pull scripts from libraries, create the scenario and execute it at the volume that they were seeing tested or exercised in production.
Yeah, I think it's functional as well as performance,
Yeah.
right? I mean, we have in kind of that DevOps continuous delivery environment. We had a big conversation with our customers about it on Monday, but in that environment, you're probably going to see kind of API-based performance testing on a module by module basis that's a little bit more frequent, and then end-to-end testing periodically over the course of a release cycle. And so when a module is changed and updated via code, it's doing the analysis to be able to execute performance tests on that specific area.
Yeah, and that's again coming back to we have App Pulse now in our wheelhouse, not just in the broader software team, but within our group. So
being
able to reach into production and say what's actually happening, and now how do I
test that specifically
in some automated way. What's next? So the next generation applications and experiences. Renato, what do you think?
All right, how many of you already have some kind of AR device today?
Not any.
None.
I do.
Look at your hands right now.
Yeah.
You realize that what you have in your hands are AR, right? Or it's going to be an AR engine in the future.
Not everyone's playing Pokemon Go, though.
That's true. So that's me. So that's where it gets really interesting, right? When we look at this, it isn't necessarily, a game or something like that. We're really looking into the next generation of user interaction, right? Because today we're all thinking about, I need to mimic a click on a button. Well, that's because you're assuming that the interface is going to be a little square dialogue sitting on the screen. Well, what is it? What if it's not? Right? What if you're using voice commands or you're using gestures, right? And there is not necessarily clicking on a button, or the application is so cohesive. For me, the most cohesive thing I've seen lately. Have you guys ever seen Amazon buttons?
Yes.
Ever?
Yeah, just the button, and then it orders something.
Yeah. That's it.
I've never used it, but it's pretty cool.
My grandma can use technology without even thinking about it, right? Or even if you look at kids, how many of you have seen three-year-olds around, or 4-year-olds? 3-year-olds. Have you ever seen a 3-year-old trying to flip
a piece of paper?
A piece of paper?
My son did this.
Right?
Yeah, we went camping, actually, and I gave him a non-device. I think your microphone, by the way.
Is it my fault? Thank you. See.
Next generation user interface.
Hello.
But yeah, we went into the forest, and of course the iPad wasn't doing anything for him, and so I gave him a physical book, and he was only 3 at the time, and yeah, he's like, "What is this? It's not doing anything."
It's not doing anything. Exactly. So that's the impact. Like because we've been doing it for so long, we look at interfaces and we look at how applications are built. But the reality is they are evolving to a point where the interface, the interactions are going to be completely dynamic and different. So now we got to figure out what does that mean to us.
Yeah.
Right?
What does it mean to you from a performance?
I think it's interesting. I mean, not only obviously from a testing of newer applications that are built on top of new technology, but I think it's also interesting from the standpoint of analyzing the results. of a test, right? Because ultimately, if I can have some sort of three-dimensional depiction of what a system looks like and be able to parse that system to really dive in to understand the module where my bottleneck is occurring and even the thread within that module that it's occurring, it kind of makes it easier to be able to dive in.
And while it sounds like science fiction, a lot of this stuff is multi-dimensional anyways. The data itself on a 2D interface doesn't make as much sense.
It's really hard to
It's really hard to,
right?
like, so in
Even though you've got it
diagnostics
there.
data, for example, you're going into a third dimension of that data, and it does make a lot more sense if you can visualize it that way. Very cool. So some of the things that we've done in this area to date, so obviously we're investing quite a bit in mobile testing, network virtualization, location simulation, the IoT protocols, both for functional and performance testing. And a lot of the stuff that we talked about that Renato mentioned, even the buttons, I mean, these are API calls, right? You push a button, it's a pre-structured API call that goes out to Amazon and says, send this to my house in a giant package. Right in the last, for example, release of Mobile Center, we're now supporting like the fingerprint authentication, which I mentioned a couple times this week. And the next stage there is how to recognize voice input. So how do you produce voice input to a device that's sitting in a closet somewhere or outside of your organization, or that we're hosting for you, and we'll provide the tools for you to be able to do that. What about some of this stuff over here? So
I think, with blockchain, right, I think some of our, actually some of the partners that we work with have come back to us and said that there are actually major bottlenecks within blockchain, and that they need us to develop support for that protocol to help them properly handle releases and layouts.
And we're just at the tip of the iceberg there. I mean, every day
Absolutely.
I'm seeing more applications that are going in this direction, leveraging blockchain as a method of not communication, but data
Security and
security, the transactions between data. So we're going to see a lot more of that. The VR, AR stuff, I mean, this stuff is not going to test itself. This is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And it's coming out of the gaming space and getting into things like sporting. For example, ESPN will put cameras in helmets so that you can put on a HoloLens or a Vive or Oculus Rift and be able to watch the game from the field in 360 degrees, and in real time see all the stats that are going on for the different players, which is crazy, but it's real. It's there today. How do you test that? How do you functionally test it? How do you performance test it when there's a Super Bowl? And maybe not now, but at some point when there's 50 million people watching this feed of a guy on the field running the ball.
I think that we already have like 3 different channels during our major sporting events, where one of them's the standard feed, one of them's from one team's perspective, another one's from another team's perspective. But given that we already have that demand to do things like that, how many people 5 years from now, because Tom Brady's still going to somehow be playing 5 years from now, are going to tune into the Tom Brady helmet channel and watch that?
I think for the audience, we talk more in terms of European football and
Yeah.
Champions League. Yeah.
All right. Maybe Messi will still be playing. We'll
Maybe. This guy.
Don't get me started on soccer.
Yeah. So there's a whole bunch of challenges coming up. These are all things that are being actively investigated in our teams to understand what is the impact. But like the previous examples, not only what is the impact to you as testers, as application owners, as developers, but how do we leverage some of these things? Does it make sense to do load testing in VR? Probably not. I'd be super cool if it did, but we'll see. Cool. So I think next we're going to talk a bit about like actual real-time things that we're doing now that are going to be coming up in the next couple of releases, correct? Are you up first?
I don't know.
No, it's me.
It's you. Go for it.
Maybe I'll leave you enough time this time. All right, so I'll actually make it very quickly because we've covered a lot of this stuff this week. So specific to functional testing, these are some of the things that my team puts together and understands how is this going to impact us. So there's a ton of buzzwords and trends right now. You won't see blockchain specifically there, but like big data before it, which was, it is still a hot topic, right? Big data. But from a functional testing perspective, we found in the end it wasn't all that different from regular testing. You're still coming through the front end. You're still, going through functional tests the same way you would. It's just behind the scenes somewhere. There's some, BI system that's analyzing data in a different way. But things like artificial intelligence, there's a huge surge of investment around artificial intelligence and how do we leverage it for functional testing, but also how do we test against systems that are themselves intelligent in some way? How do we teach our tools to test? Rather than testing ourselves and going through and doing the traditional kind of scripting approach, can we teach a very robust automation API or standard how to do testing? And so there's a lot of exciting things that are going on there. Virtualization and containers, we see huge developments in this area, and not just as a means of getting applications built, stood up faster, but this is now becoming the norm for operations as well. IoT, this number continues to grow. Every time I see the by 2020 number, this number increases, so it's becoming increasingly prevalent, but also the demand for functional testing there is significant enough that we've already made some investments in that area with the MQTT protocols and being able to connect that with a front-end UI-driven test. So I'll jump directly into some of the areas that we are investing today, and these are things that you'll see in the next couple of releases. We can't be specific, but of course, if anything stands out, happy to take questions. So the themes from my team's perspective are the DevOps toolchain. How do we address the way that application development is changing? The technology support, which is a constant battle, right? There's new technologies appearing all the time. Which ones are relevant to us? Which ones are not? And how do we support them? And that, just as a practical example, again, the mobile devices and the different interfaces that they provide. First, touch, now voice, visual. I mean, there's all sorts of things that it can do there. Intelligent automation, leveraging AI to do predictive human behavior analysis and understand through testing the impact of these systems. And then shift right, which is again, addressing the non-technical needs for testing, because more and more we're seeing, especially in the large SIs, the Capgeminis of the world, Accentures, are pushing more in this direction. So whereas a lot of development teams are moving towards the shift left, the larger testing organizations are kind of going towards the shift right. So these are just some areas of development for us in that, but I'll get a little more specific there in a second. So Codeless, it's been a long week. Codeless test automation is something we've been committed to for years with the introduction of BPT or keyword views in UFT and continually kind of refine and enhance that to make automation accessible to the less technical audience. How many of you are familiar with TrueClient as a performance testing solution, right? Very capable, great for web testing, not originally intended for functional testing. We can leverage them as functional tests, as I mentioned a few times this week, instrument or functional. But we found that, when we looked at, does TrueClient satisfy the needs for functional testing? And if not, can we change it? Can we modify it in some way so that it does? I think we went through this for several months and found in the end, we can learn some lessons there, but there's some limitations as well. And rather than pour a lot of investment into modifying TrueClient, which is specifically designed for performance testing, it needs to be as scalable as possible, but is also bound to the browser, we're going to do something a little bit different. So we've already started investing in this area. Now that we have the Silk team on board as well with this agenda, we're working together and understanding what have we done in both sides of the house, in the keyword-driven testing and the BPT side of the house, to deliver something that's really impactful to the functional tester. So what you see here is kind of a mock-up, although it's a little more than a mock-up, where we can do a very TrueClient-like interface for functional testing, where everything is very easily readable, maybe drag and drop, a little more graphical than we're used to, sits outside of the test tools, so it's a little more easily consumed, maybe something that you can take advantage of as part of Storm Runner Functional or even as a standalone. Behind the scenes, there's always code. If anybody tells you that there's no code at all, everything's just graphics and da-da-da, they're lying. Two, it's limiting, because at some point, somewhere, someday, you're going to need to drop down to code. I guarantee it. So if we don't provide this interface, then we've provided only a partial solution. And the same is true in TrueClient,
Yep.
right? Very recently, opening up the doors and saying, now you can expose the code behind TrueClient. But it's more than just the graphics and the code behind it. We want to provide a whole new framework. So years ago when we introduced BPT was, or framework was a nice to have, not a need to have. It was a benefit that you might go for, but yeah, we're okay without a framework. We can do our testing on our own. And then a lot of companies ended up developing something in Excel in many ways, using macros to drive their test framework. And others use more traditional approaches. But in this case, we want to provide a standard framework that applies across the technologies, that's supported by the codeless and the coded, either way, transparent to you, the tester. But something that you could easily put in front of a business tester or subject matter expert, and they would feel comfortable working in that environment. Very, very tactical. I like to just kind of put this up as, hey, here's the specific things that we're working on in functional testing for UFT, those of you who are using UFT. And I'm not going to read it all. But I might highlight a few of these just for conversation's sake. So you can see the themes here, the DevOps, the technology support, the intelligent automation, shift right, which includes the code list that I just mentioned. Use of the virtual table server for functional testing. As I mentioned, virtual table server in our previous guest session. Not everyone has an Oracle server available. So we want to provide something that's highly scalable, but can also be used across functional and performance, and a single place to do your functional test data management. And it's very easy to use, and it's free. It's included in the tools. Intelligent automation, so self-healing objects. When things change from one release to the next, how do we adjust? Right, so BPT is able to, for example, scan an SAP system from one release to the next and say the component has changed. Do you want to update it? Very simple. What if we take that one step further and say, we've made the following changes to your test as a result? So you no longer have to go in and make those changes, but they're flagged as something that, okay, I accept this change. Or no, that's not what I expected at all. That's a defect. I mentioned some of these things over here for the technology support, so audio injection, Face ID simulation. This one's going to be interesting, I think, because there's a very simple API available for Face ID in iOS and in Samsung as well, that you provide a yes-no response. But what if I want to provide kind of a middle response? What about Shane wearing sunglasses? See if that fools the application. So we'll have to do some interesting things there. And then, of course, there's the usual keeping up to date on the latest technologies, SAP UI5, Windows, and so on. Anything that stands out here before I kind of move on? No questions? Anything that's missing? You're like, come on, why aren't you supporting this yet? Awesome. That means we're doing everything right. From a lean-FT or shift-left perspective, it's a little bit different. So the same sort of trends, but from a slightly different perspective. We still have the DevOps, the technology support, the usability and optimization, but a big part of this is the open source enablement. How are we leveraging ourselves, but also enabling you to make the most of your open source investments? So very specifically, the features that are coming in the next couple of releases. So a lot of this you'll see is very similar to what we're doing in UFT because they're using the same sort of technology there. But Windows UI automation framework, which was added a couple of releases ago in UFT, is coming to LeanFT. Integrations like Jira, Applitools, SOAP UI execution, etc. Power Builder. People are still using Power Builder, shockingly. And people ask for it in LeanFT, which is amazing. But we support terminal emulators in LeanFT. That was the #1 request Archie pumps his fist because yes. But the number one request after LeanFT was launched is, can you do green screen? It's like, okay. So being very, adaptive to our customers in this case. But things like bringing LeanFT to Amazon Code Pipeline, as we bring LeanFT and Storm Under Functional to both Code Pipeline and CodeStar to enable that type of development. And other cloud native environments, for example, SAP Cloud Platform, for those of you who are moving to HANA. From a LeanFT perspective, anything that stands out? Any questions? I want to give Jason some time here. Okay. And then the Storm Under Functional piece. Well, hopefully all of you had a chance to visit the Storm Under Functional booth up on the show floor. Great. I hope all of you signed up for a trial. There's no commitment. You just sign up. It's easy. Off you go. Some things that are coming very soon. Mac support. I wish it would have been there 2 weeks ago, but we're still in the legal discussions with that provider. So very soon. This releases, by the way, every 4 to 6 weeks. So even some of the things that I put on this slide were released on the weekend before we came here. So I couldn't change my slide, but that's how quickly we're releasing in Storm Under Functional. For example, Appium support. It's already there. The remote mobile recording from LeanFT and UFT. I talked about it in day one. It's already there. But we'll be adding like the LeanFT spy, for example. So we can do a little more than just the basic test recording in Storm Under Functional. And we've got a long-term plan around all of these areas, lab design and execution, that I'd be happy to share with you in more detail if you're interested. By the way, Storm Under Functional, because it is such a fast-moving product for us, this is entirely based on customer feedback. So when we hear a customer say, oh yeah, I need Power Builder support, really? And then suddenly that becomes something on the list for the next couple of releases. The reporting, analytics, and integration, so some things that are coming very soon. Video storyboarding. Smart Defects is already there. It was in the last release. We have Jira support today, on top of course, ALM Octane, and we'll continue in building that out. Applitools support, which again, I would have been there from the beginning, but legal agreements and such. And that's it from a functional testing perspective. Any questions whatsoever before I hand it over to my colleague? All right.
I'm
Thank
up.
you. Finally.
Thank you. Thanks, Shane. So for performance testing, just kind of wanted to give some context around some of the direction that we're moving in with our performance testing tools. So, Gartner has this concept of bimodal. We talked about mode 1, mode 2 the other day, but this is basically the environment we've lived in for a long time, right? People buy PC, they share licenses across a whole bunch of different teams to be able to execute their performance tests. And about 10 years ago, everyone started to flirt with Agile, right? And so they'd spin off these individual project teams who would run and try to figure out the Agile thing and see how that worked. And as they were kind of figuring out Agile, they looked at the tools that Central IT was providing them, and they said, we do things a little bit differently. We have different personas. We have Scrum Masters. We have product owners. We have generalists, right? We have dev testers. We do things a little bit differently. So we don't want to use your tools. We want to go open source. We want to use a Jira, Rally. We want to use Selenium. We want to use JMeter to be able to get our stuff done, things that are more code-driven. And so they started to adopt different tools to be able to support those practices. And eventually, that Agile stuff worked at a team level. And so organizations started to build out more and more Agile teams across the organization. And they formed what we refer to in a very faded font as the line of business, right? So you have this collection of Agile teams that are over here. And what's interesting is that while these guys tend to be shared services, these guys still tend to operate in silos. A lot of them make their own decisions around tools and kind of do their own things within the organization. And this picture of how things are was very important for us to realize as a vendor, because we started to understand that the way we licensed our products didn't necessarily fit with these guys, and the way that we were allowing our products to be used didn't really fit the use cases for these guys in the Agile organization. So while over in the traditional performance testing groups, because we share things, we tend to have local operations, a bunch of shared resources, we share load generators, we share testing environments, we have a bunch of experts, we've got performance engineers, that is all they do all day long. And it tends to be a little bit more waterfall. Over on the Agile side, because we move quickly, we operate in silos, our way to reduce the cost of operation is to go to the cloud. And use the cloud to spin up load generators whenever we need them. We need tools that are more team-friendly, that aren't built around experts that live in a particular tool all day long. They want to be able to use tools that they're going to pop in and out of and on a less frequent basis, but still be able to get the job done that they need to be able to do. And then finally, they're agile and need to go into an accelerated release cycle. So what this meant from our perspective is that we needed to be able to support generating traffic from a variety of different environments, whether it's public cloud, private cloud, or on-premise. We need to be able to integrate with a lot of different tools within an environment, right? Everyone's made investments into a variety of different tools, and we need to be able to seamlessly fit into those tool ecosystems. So we need to integrate not only with the Bamboos and the Jenkins of the world for CI/CD, but we also need to be able to integrate with third-party APM solutions, so like your New Relics, your App Dynamics, Dynatrace. But the other, because these guys on the Agile side tend to be siloed, we needed a new licensing model, and that's why we came out with virtual user days on the Performance Center and Load Runner side, and then virtual user hours with StormRunner Load, so that they could buy that bucket of hours. It makes it much more cost effective, which we talked about the other day. I think the other thing that's kind of interesting about the bimodal picture is that we see from a process perspective, Agile starting to come back and influence central IT. So even central IT is becoming a little bit more iterative and adopting some of those Agile practices. But on the other side of things, there's kind of a misconception in Agile that everybody can do everything. We can all be cross-functional and everything's going to work perfectly fine. As I think Shane was talking about earlier, dev aren't the greatest testers in the world. I will acknowledge that I was a developer and I was horrible at testing my own code. I was one of the evil people that just kind of threw it over the fence and let it go. So they're starting to recognize that, right? And they're starting to also value the expertise that was there with things like performance testing. And so what we're starting to see our organizations form kind of these tiger teams of performance engineers that run around and influence the practices of individual Scrum teams over on the Agile side. So maybe help them develop their test scripts, help them define their scenarios, review what they've created so far, suggest modifications so that the quality can increase. From a roadmap perspective, for PC and Load Runner, for 1257, which is coming up in the next couple of months, we're really putting a lot of focus on improving our success rate of our test. So a lot of stability fixes. In the medium term for 1260, that's going to come out on the back end of this year. We're going to have TFS and Team City integration in Performance Center. So again, it can adopt to that Agile environment. Git integration, continued emphasis of the REST APIs. We're continuing with our load generators for PC and Load Runner. We have containerized those load generators. They're Dockerized. And we're continuing to kind of enhance that Dockerization capability. The end goal, obviously, is that you can use PC and Load Runner, plug into your on-prem or your cloud-based environment, and individual machines can be used as a load generator when they need to be used as a load generator, and can be used for something completely different for the majority of the time. So allows you a lot more flexibility in your testing environment, and also to ease the upgrade and maintenance process for your load generators. Longer term, with PAL, we talked about earlier today about adding new sources to PAL with New Relic, and improving the log capability. I think some of the things that our friends at Micro Focus, Heritage Micro Focus, do really well, we're able to pull over now into our existing environment. And one of those is their logging and troubleshooting capabilities. So we're going to be taking some of the things that they do on that side of the house and implementing it for PC and Load Runner. Continued investment in improving our analysis capability within PC, and really moving forward from a technology perspective. Scripting wise, yeah.
Stuff, is that already included in PC, or do you have to also have RUM and work with RUM to get the PAL stuff up and running?
Yeah, so PC is included. PAL is included inside of PC, right? It does leverage data from RUM as an option. You can pull it from other sources as well, right? Yeah. Yeah, but we realize to get where we really want to take PAL, we also need to be able to integrate with your AppDynamics, New Relic, Dynatrace, and some other monitoring sources to be able to pull in additional data. Yeah. Yeah, it's a really neat capability. So I mean, if anyone here is actually interested in checking out PAL, I highly encourage you to reach out to Vicky or myself directly, or pull in your account rep. We're more than happy to demo it and help you out with investigating. So scripting perspective, I don't know. Do you want to talk a little bit about Next Gen Web at all, or no? All right. So we're playing around. Obviously, we have to extend the browser support for True Client. Java 9 and Windows 10 are big on the agenda. Next Gen Web, we're making some improvements to be able to support the newer web protocols, and taking that to market. I think our long-term vision is that we want to be able to have our scripting capabilities modified within your standard IDEs, rather than having to use VueGen. And so we're going to really start to focus in that direction of having IDE integrations and plugins to be able to allow for script creation and modification. And then with Storm, we continue to mature Storm as we move forward. As Shane had mentioned with Storm Runner Functional, Storm Runner Load is a agile project. It releases every 8 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks. And we're taking the approach with Storm of we develop, we release, we improve, but we're also receiving a lot of feedback from our traditional PC and Load Runner customer base who are interested in moving out to the cloud with Storm, and understanding what our gaps and capabilities are, what they want us to focus on. Obviously, Load Runner and PC have a ton of functionality in there, so it allows us to help prioritize what we want to build inside of Storm Runner Load first. So, as far as part of that expansion of the Storm capability, we just released our analysis, the beta version of our analysis tab inside of Storm Runner Load. You'll see continued expansion there. We're adding AppDynamics in the short term, Jenkins trending, some additional runtime logic to make our scenarios on par with what you can do with PC and Load Runner. We're going to be adding Team City. We already integrate with the AWS VPC. We're going to add Azure's VPC environment. some additional enhancements with the SLA settings. And then long term, obviously we have our retailers that are currently customers of ours are pushing us towards being able to support 10 million concurrent users. We're at 5 right now. We're actually not that far off. We already have a Splunk integration. We'll be adding integrations with Datadog, and then TFS, Jira, and then some of the machine learning concepts we talked about earlier. I think one of our themes moving forward is really going to be one of openness, right? So we already support JMeter scripts within both JMeter and Selenium scripts within PC LoadRunner and StormRunner Load. We support Gatling as part of StormRunner Load. Gatling's coming to PC and LoadRunner. But we also have a massive investment in our API, REST API across all the product suites. And you know, a lot of our customers are asking for access to the data, right? They want access to the data. Analysis tool is great. They want to be able to manipulate things on their own. With LoadRunner PC and StormRunner Load, that's absolutely part of our agenda, is to expose that data in a time series database so that you can play with it how you need to and pull it into a third-party BI tool if you want to. So
with LoadRunner, you typically get like a default number of users to play with before you purchase a license to scale. What's the number of users that you can get with StormRunner Load in the trial version?
Yeah, in the trial version, we give you like 500 virtual user hours to play around with. Yeah, it's on a consumable basis, but no, it's actually interesting because you can play around with that, right? So in Storm, you start out with 500 virtual user hours, so you could actually run 1 half-hour test of 1,000 users if you wanted to. You can run 10-hour-long test with 50 users. You can play around with that as you need, but obviously, if you know. Each of you have account reps, and we can set you up with a bigger trial footprint.
Thinking about global world domination and somehow scripting StormRunner Load, it doesn't allow you to denial of service attack a website on a trial. Even if you signed up on 4 different accounts and did 4 tests at the same time, sort of thinking, you still couldn't do it.
Yeah.
You're way ahead of you, because I know you guys. I've been there.
Yeah.
I know what you're thinking.
The trial has some sort of limitations, but if you are testing, let's say, your own application and so on, you can contact us and we will remove particular limitations that we have.
Yeah. It doesn't have any functional limitations. It's just limitations on the number of users. Yeah, it's free. Yeah, absolutely. All right. Any other questions, concerns about what wasn't on the time? Oh, should we talk? Yeah. So one of the other items that is on the agenda for PC that would be kind of important to mention is decoupling from ALM is certainly on the timeline. We realize that there are challenges with the upgrade and maintenance process and installation process of PC, and that's something important that we need to tackle. So we're decoupling PC from ALM, and that's kind of a first step to make it a lot easier to install, upgrade, and maintain. Eventually, we're going to be containerizing, Dockerizing the entire PC instance to allow it to be a lot more easy to install and upgrade. So, anything? All right. All right. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you very much. So we're done for the day. We're done for the event. There is a grab-and-go lunch available upstairs, and then buses will start to go to the airport. So there's a free shuttle bus service every 10 minutes starting 1:30 p.m. And it will be for 2 hours. So from 1:30, there will be a bus going to the airport every 10 minutes, and is a free service. Grab and go lunch upstairs. Thank you very much. Thanks for staying with us. I hope you enjoyed, We definitely love to get you here, to hear your comments, to hear how much you've been involved, and hope to see you soon.